Hello students. So today we will start with chapter number 5, that is the respiratory system. We will start with this slide with the definition of respiration or what is respiration. So respiration is the process of releasing energy by breaking down food or glucose needed for various activities of the body. So for doing various activities of the body, our body need energy, and that energy we get by the breakdown of glucose by utilizing oxygen which we breathe. Okay, and during this process of respiration, the food get oxidized or get burned in the presence of oxygen or sometimes in the absence of oxygen to release energy. So this is what is respiration. Now, the types of respiration. There are two types of respiration. One is aerobic respiration and the other one is anaerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is the respiration that utilizes oxygen, and anaerobic respiration that does not utilize oxygen. The next slide is about organs associated with respiration process. So what are the organs needed for this process? The organs are nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi and lungs. So these are the organs which are associated with the respiration process which are occurring in a human body. Now we will learn about the first organ, that is nose. So nose has some characteristic features. So what are those features? The first one is it has two nostrils. The next one, the nostrils have a hairy lining to prevent dust particles from reaching into the lungs. The third point, the lining of the nasal chamber has mucus which traps germs and dust. And the fourth one is one should breathe through the nose and not through the mouth. So the air is going inside the body with those two nostrils, and the nostrils have hair or hairy lining to prevent any larger particles going inside our lungs. Then the nostrils, the nasal chamber has mucus which can trap germs and dust and our body can get rid of all those germs and dusts. And the most important thing, that is we should breathe through our nose but not through our mouth, because when we breathe through our nose, the larger particles can get trapped with those nasal hair which cannot be trapped with our when we breathe through our mouth. The next point is pharynx. So what are the features of pharynx? Pharynx is a common passage for both air and food. And the next point is it leads into two passages. One, the windpipe or trachea, and the other one is the food pipe. Now the next slide is about larynx. So what are the features of larynx now? So the first point is it is the voice box. Why it is the voice box? It comes in the second point because this larynx contains vocal cords. Okay, and when the air pass through these vocal cords, the air forcibly vibrates the cords to produce sound. Okay, and the last point is the front opening of the windpipe is guarded by a muscular flap which is known as epiglottis. This epiglottis closes the windpipe at the time of swallowing of food. So when we eat food, this epiglottis closes the windpipe so that the food can pass to the food pipe, not in the windpipe. Now, the next slide is about trachea. So, what are the features of trachea? It runs in the middle of the chest up to a short distance between the two lungs, where it divides into two branches called bronchi. So, trachea runs in the middle of the chest, okay, and it divides into two branches which we call as bronchi. The wall of the trachea has C-shaped rings of cartilage to prevent it from collapsing. And the third point, the inner linings have ciliated epithelium. The next point, bronchi. The first point, the two bronchi lead into right and left lungs respectively. So just now in the last slide only I told that the trachea gets divided into two branches which we call it bronchi. Now that bronchi, one bronchi goes to the left lungs and the other goes to the right lungs. Now each bronchus is further divided into smaller and smaller branches known as bronchioles. At the end of these bronchioles are the microscopic air sacs called alveoli. Now the end of the bronchioles, like the bronchi, they get divided more and more. They have more and more divisions which we call as bronchioles. And the end of these bronchioles have microscopic air sac which we call as alveoli. Now these alveoli are richly supplied with blood capillaries, and the walls of the alveoli are extremely thin and moist so that diffusion of gases can take place easily. The last organ are the lungs. So what are the characteristic features of lungs? The lungs are a pair of pink and spongy elastic organs protected by the rib cage. The next point, the lungs rest on a diaphragm. The third point, the lungs are protected from outside by two membranes called the outer and inner pleura. The fourth point, the space between the two membranes is filled with a fluid. And the last point, the fluid acts as a shock absorber and so protect the lungs. So what are the points? The first is lungs are a pair of pink and spongy elastic organ, and the lungs are protected by the rib cage. The lungs actually rest on diaphragm. Diaphragm is a muscular organ which helps the lungs to rest on it. Okay, and the diaphragm also is divided our body into chest cavity and the abdominal cavity. The next point is the lungs are protected by a membrane which we call as pleura. Now this pleura is a double layered membrane. The outer membrane is known as outer pleura and the inner membrane is known as inner pleura. Now the space between the outer pleura and the inner pleura has a fluid, and that fluid is actually a shock absorber, and thus the fluid is protecting the lungs. The most important organ needed for respiration process are the lungs. So what are the features of lungs? The lungs are a pair of pink and spongy elastic organs protected by the rib cage. So lungs are protected by rib cage. The next point, the lungs rest on a diaphragm. So diaphragm is nothing but a muscular organ, okay, where the lungs can rest upon, and this diaphragm has divided our body cavity into two cavities. The first one is the chest cavity and the next one is the abdominal cavity. So this is all about diaphragm. Now the third point, the lungs are protected from outside by two membranes called the outer and inner pleura. So the membrane which is covering the lungs is known as pleura. So pleura has the outer part which is known as outer pleura and the inner part which is known as inner pleura. Now the space between these two membranes means the outer pleura and the inner pleura is filled up with a fluid. This fluid acts as a shock absorber and thus protect the lungs. Thank you, students. Please listen to this PPT and go through the chapter properly. If you do both the things simultaneously, then the chapter will be very clear to you. So do it and study well. Thank you.